But somehow we have developed a system where we are inherently increasing the proportion of vehicles on our roads, and this is a global phenomenon, okay, that are less safe comparatively for pedestrians and cyclists in the
Yeah.
form of SUVs. Welcome to the Transport Leaders Podcast, where we discuss the breakthrough ideas and bold solutions transforming the future of transport around the world. Join a global community of transport leaders, professionals, academics, and advocates as we unpack transport's toughest challenges and spotlight the strategies driving real change. From system reform levers and political realities to sustainability and technological disruption, experienced transport professionals, Graham McCabe and Russell King, and their guests offer expert perspectives as we discuss ways to transform our transport systems.
G'day, I'm Graham McCabe. I'm founder of Step Advisory, a transport planning and traffic engineering firm, and I've worked in consultancy and government for over 25 years across Australasia and Asia.
And hello, I'm Russell King. I'm a transport strategist and the founder of the Transport Leader blog and newsletter. And I've worked on the policy side of transport for around 20 years.
Okay, Russell, what are we talking about today?
Well, Graham, if you remember last time, we talked about the history of road safety and all the progress we've made on road safety up to this point. But then talked about, but we stopped at talking about what we needed to do next in terms of road safety. So I think today's episode is okay. That's the history of road safety. Where do we go from here? Let's talk about the key takeaways from episode one in terms of what does that mean for where we go from here. Okay, because I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn from what's been done in the past, which I think we should inform where we move forward. So if we
So,
have a look at some of the
yeah,
key initiatives, so you go through. You go through. What
yeah,
did you
okay,
think
all right,
the things
okay.
that did
So
change?
there's been things that have addressed the vehicle. So, crash resistance, crumple zones, advanced driving systems. There's been things that have affected drivers and behavior, some of which are enforcement, some of which are vehicle related. So, seat belts, those type of things. The behavior aspect is the enforcement of the wearing of the seat belts. And then there's been changes to how we design roads and streets. So on the bad side, pedestrian fencing. On the good side, things like clear zones on the sides of motorways so that if somebody falls asleep and runs off the road, they don't smash into a tree and die.
Yeah, we've also done some stuff around drivers themselves as well, and trying to change their habits.
Yeah, so fatigue management, drink driving campaigns, as I said, seatbelt wearing. There's a general mix between education and enforcement within the road safety area. So the reason why you shouldn't drink and drive, slowing down reaction times, etc. And on the other side of that, actually enforcing strong penalties to discourage the behaviour.
Yeah. Now, all of those things have made significant improvements to road safety, I think it's fair to say. Not to the point where we have very few deaths on our road, unfortunately. We still have large numbers of deaths and serious injuries every year on our roads. But they have made a difference. But I think the key thing for me to take away is that these things were not, even though they've been hugely beneficial and advocates at the time said they would be hugely beneficial and have proven to be correct, they were very controversial at the time and often required a lot of persuasion in order to get people to adopt these changes, whether that's implementing seatbelts in cars, changing the infrastructure of cars, which was resisted by some of the automotive industry, whether that's drink driving rules, all of those things, even though the case for them has been really strong from a safety perspective, they have been resisted, haven't they?
They have been at various levels. So you think about something like speeds. It's very easy for a car manufacturer to limit the speed of a vehicle. We
Yes.
have a national speed limit, maximum 100 kilometres per hour, and then there are exemptions for some motorways. And in the Northern Territory, some roads are at 130. So you could very easily have a limiter on every vehicle in Australia that set the speed limit to 110 kilometres an hour. And so there's two, I suppose, key cases to that. One is impinging freedom. I should be able to drive at whatever speed I want on private property. Uh, and then there's the what if, just in case, I need to avoid a crash by putting my foot down on the accelerator. Which is kind of a nonsense one, but let's go with it for now.
Yeah, the case against delimiters is not strong. But is there any jurisdiction in the world that has introduced delimiters?
This is where I'm out of my knowledge there. I know that there are jurisdictions where people with speeding convictions have had limiters placed on their vehicles, but we have limiters. We have them on trucks already.
Yes, and I think it's an interesting thing, and I think we'll probe into this because I think attitudes towards speeding are an interesting human behavioural trait and something that we'll need to explore when we discuss speeds. But to move us on, one of the things that seems to be flavour of the month, I think, in the road safety space, and the UK's recently released road safety strategy incorporated this approach, is what they call a safe system approach. What is the safe system approach?
So the safe systems has four key pillars. So one is safer people. So that's working on the behavioural side of things. In New South Wales, where I am, unfortunately, the imagery that they use is of a person walking across a pedestrian crossing. Well, that's you know, shouldn't you be worrying more about the fact that they shouldn't be hit in the first place than that they're using the pedestrian crossing? Getting back to our previous conversation about jaywalking.
But the aspect of the New South Wales government then that they've approved that as their image, right? It's our job to keep it's our job for pedestrians to look after themselves rather than to make sure that they're in a safe system.
Well, that's part of their safe system imagery. Yeah. You can go to towards0.nsw.gov.au to see that. Um, so the next one is safe vehicles. So we've talked about that, having vehicles which minimize the energy that's transferred into the people within the vehicle, other vehicles, or the pedestrians who are crossing the zebra crossing, but also have advanced driving systems. So what are called ADAS, advanced driving assistance systems. So things like lane keeping, alertness monitoring, those type of things. And then there's safer roads. So that's making sure that the road environment is safe. And that's where a lot of the energy is going into at the moment through things like the risk assessment frameworks for determining where to make road safety improvements.
But let's pick up on that one quickly. When we say road safety improvements, is that more forgiving roads or is that designing roads to be slower?
So that could be both. So it could be
Okay.
the fourth pillar, which is a safe speed. So as we discussed last week, if you have an identified risk or a crash black spot, you can address it by improving the road environment or reducing the speed,
Yeah.
or a combination of both.
Okay. So that's the safe system approach. What's its strengths?
Well, the strengths are when it's applied properly and there's no.
Is that an inherent weakness that it might not be applied properly? Is that kind of
Well, yeah, that was
okay,
the
sorry. Have I
the
stolen your
how
thunder?
yeah. So the you know you the safe vehicles, well, that comes through United Nations regulations. If whose crash assessment protocol that you're adopting, whether it's the Euro new car assessment program or the American one that you're using as your framework for the vehicles. So that's actually quite a strong thing because you look at the Euro NCAP has a very high focus on the impacts to other road users, so pedestrians and cyclists, with the exception of utility vehicles and SUVs, which are part of historical political deals about not supporting industry by not having them to have to care so much about pesky people walking.
Let's pick up on this because this is a really
Yeah.
important point, and in amongst road safety people, this is a really important area here. Okay, is that theoretically the vehicle safety standards, okay, are about making, as you say, in the European ones, are supposed to be making about both the people in the car and outside of the vehicle, okay, safer. But somehow we have developed a system where we are inherently increasing the proportion of vehicles on our roads, and this is a global phenomenon, okay, that are less safe comparatively for pedestrians and cyclists in the
Yeah.
form of SUVs. And as you suggest, effectively been a nod and a wink that says, when these vehicles are assessed, they're kind of assessed as, oh yes, they're very safe, but only within their own category. They're not compared to other vehicles.
They're
So,
they're not they're not considered passenger vehicles, even
yeah,
though that they carry
they clearly
passengers.
are.
And that's through a deliberate evolution within the motoring industry of, that were historically a cab that would fit one or two people with a large bed, a truck bed. And then people went, well, we actually want to carry more than one person or two people. So they created what was called a dual cab, which was you could squeeze people in a second row of seats. But there was also a loophole in many parts of the world where you could use those vehicles for private use as well. Yeah, the auto industry is really good at market research. Went, here's a market opportunity. If I can sell the utility vehicle that can be then seen as a family vehicle, but the owner gets the economic benefit of it being a work vehicle and all those tax incentives and discounts that come with it being a work vehicle. And then I can up all the features and charge even more and more and more. And then the value of the cargo compartment or the bed has gone down and down and down. So if you compare tradespeople between their personal vehicle, which will be a sports utility vehicle, and their work vehicle, which more and more these days is a van.
Yes. Yes. So effectively, and the safe system approach doesn't deal with this, does it?
No, because this is a political issue.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Adopting the safe system approach, it sounds very nice since it's a systemic system safety thing. Sounds good on what it says on the tin, kind of thing. But actually, it's got big, big holes on it. But it's not the only weakness, is it? Of the
Yeah.
safe
But
system.
sorry, and just go back to that. You could say, well, that's fine. You can have these vehicles, but they also have to be not so deadly to pedestrians or bicycle riders. So,
Yeah.
but requiring them to have the same ADAS systems as the vans do, so that they actually stop before hitting a pedestrian, or if they do hit a pedestrian, they have the bonnet or front based airbags to reduce the impact. So you can address it. There's a political decision not to address
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of stuff that could be done
Yeah.
to make things better. I think there's a whole bigger conversation about getting ever larger vehicles, which is what we've been doing over several decades. Whether that inherently does it, but okay, so that's one weakness of the safe system approach.
Yeah. So, the biggest weakness of the safer roads approach is it creates more open roads. So a safer road will have a wider lane. It will have a wider shoulder and clear zone. And that's inviting to people to drive faster.
Yes, and so is that just the way that, as you say, is that the way the safe system approach has been implemented? So actually, the safe system approach doesn't sort of isn't specifically saying here's what you do to make roads safer. It's kind of leaving that up to the traffic engineers who have got different interpretations of that. Is there
Well,
something?
in this case, it's more road design engineers.
I apologize to the specific engineers that are in this space. My
Oh,
expertise
no,
is not in
no,
understanding those
but
different nuances within the engineering community. But
yeah, so this that I'm being a bit flippant, but the safer roads approach could be things like putting in crash barriers on high risk curves so that vehicles don't lose control and go off the road, or putting in a median between opposing directions of traffic if there's a risk of cars traveling into the traffic of the opposing direction. So it's not just about those things. That would be more when you're designing a new road. But having that it increased expanse of open road. But safer roads can also be things like forcing speeds down through the use of speed cushions or raised pedestrian crossings. it can actually be narrowing the road from a behavioral perspective to reduce the speed by making it feel more constrained. And you can do that, for example, just through painted lines. You can make the road feel a lot less safe than it is so that people are more cautious.
Yeah. So it's not inherent in the safe system approach, but it's about the interpretation of it.
It is inherent because there is a psychological behavioral element in there as well. So
Okay.
it's the application. So all of these things are it's the application of
Yeah.
the
There's a difference between perhaps the theory and the practice. Is that where it is? Okay. So the other thing I think is a question for me on the safe system approach is that it's very car focused, not multimodal focused. Is that inherent, or is that again the difference between theory and the practice?
so safer vehicles, for example, includes uh, having alert-based systems for heavy vehicle drivers to monitor their fatigue. Seat belts on buses and coaches. 90% of it revolves around car-based travel. The safe system itself, it doesn't have actions around mode shifting to public transport, walking, and cycling. So it doesn't take out the biggest risk element of driving, which is driving itself.
Yeah, it's the exposure, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that people have towards not just driving themselves, but actually being on a road, right? And so there's an alternative school of thought which is saying maybe in terms of addition to the safe system approach, we also need a focus on creating a safer multimodal system. Okay, where you're looking to, I think the words they use are sort of eliminate car use, i.e., by moving people away from using cars, substitute by reducing the distance that people travel in their cars, controlling cars, I think, as well, and then protecting people when there have been afterwards sort of reacting to crashes and those sorts of things. So they're kind of what they're saying is at the top, what you want to be doing is reducing, you know, car ownership effectively as your first point of call and promoting alternative modes to make your system inherently safer. And then reduce, if people need to have cars, reduce the amount they have to drive in order to reduce that sort of exposure in system as well. Is that a fair
Yeah.
reflection of what they're trying to do?
Yeah. I so safe systems does apply to walking and cycling and other forms of road-based transport, but its focus is a lot around cars because that's where most of the fatalities and serious injuries occur in crashes with cars. But it isn't your normal control hierarchy. It's your risk management approach. So you've ignored the eliminate control. You're now in the well, this thing is happening. How do we manage the risk? That's
Yeah,
where safe systems sit.
yeah. It kind of inherently says people are driving. Let's deal with mitigating that as
Yes.
as opposed to trying to reduce the exposure at sort of first principles. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, so then we get to safe speeds, which is fine at an engineering level because you know what is a safe speed on a road. At a system level is where we have the problem. So when we look at increasing or lowering speed limits, that's a very political decision, as we talked about last time. But we know that lower speeds are much safer for everybody in the road environment. So whether it's a a car driver having a single vehicle crash, a truck, a bus, a car hitting a pedestrian or a bicycle rider, reducing speed is always safe.
Yeah, and we as humans have interesting attitudes on speed. So two thoughts on this. First of all, when you do conduct surveys on whether people admit to speeding, the vast majority of people do admit to speeding, and that's just on and on these surveys are highly unreliable normally because people like to pretend that they're more better behaved than they actually are on these things. And even on when you're asking them on the surveys, they still say very high proportions of them say they regularly speed.
Yeah.
Okay, they are at the same time, when you ask them about enforcement, they are loath to see enforcement, partly as a consequence. Because if everybody is effectively speeding, you can say understand why that individual would say, well, why would I would want to be enforced? Right? So there's a kind of, I'm breaching the rules, therefore I don't want it being enforced. So that kind of is inherent in the challenge that we have around speeding, which is, I think, one of the reasons you see so much backlash in various places around speed camera enforcement, for example.
Yeah. Yes, it's there are advertising campaigns which are, there's no such thing as casual speeding. Whereas the road environment will actually tell you differently.
Yeah. And so there's a couple of schools of thoughts on this, right? Isn't there? As you said earlier, there's a kind of let's build the infrastructure so that people inherently slow down subconsciously because the environment, and that works very effectively. But in retrofitting our infrastructure, that's going to take time and is very expensive, right?
Yeah.
Because our infrastructure hasn't traditionally taken that into account.
Yes. You have to use the fourth pillar, which is the safer people. To having the community understand
Yeah.
why a road that feels like you could drive at 60 kilometers an hour is a road that you should drive at 40 kilometers per.
Yes. And there's an important aspect of this as well in terms of the psychology, which is although we have maximum speeds, people drive at those maximum speeds typically. They don't drive at if I'm in a 60 zone, they don't drive at 50. They drive at 60.
Yeah, so the
And
maximum speeds can be determined in two ways. One is the road environment. So, can you see vehicles coming in from side streets? Can you react in time? Are there lots of pedestrians trying to cross the road where they might step out from a vehicle? So that's the environmental speed. So what's a safe speed to drive at based on the environmental conditions? And then there's the design speed. So design speeds are primarily applied to new roads or upgraded roads where all those factors are still considered. But then there's also the physics of you go around this curve safely at the speed, which is why we have warning signs on curves. So you may have a road which has a speed limit of 60 kilometers an hour, but it'll have a sign advising you to take a curve at no more than 30 kilometers per hour because
yes,
of the geometry of the curve.
yes,
Whereas we don't. So then we substitute those things like curve advisory speeds for signs saying that there's children about or it's a hospital zone. But we don't change the speed limit historically.
yeah. I'm not sure we'll go on to school zones. That's a different fish on that one. But question for you about we've seen places around the world. In the UK, it's the 20s plenty, it's the 30-kilometer-hour zones. And these places have seen significant reductions in crashes and the severity of crashes, which has then resulted in reduced numbers of deaths and reduced numbers of serious injuries as a
Mhm.
consequence, right? So it's been very effective. One of the things that some people argue is that says the problem with that is that people often ignore those speed limits and that the right answer is better infrastructure, and we should actually be investing in the infrastructure to slow people down, and then reduce the speed limit in a road, not just paint the sign from 50 to 30.
Yeah.
From a from an I'm interested from an infrastructure perspective, is that effective? Can we effectively go road by road and get them from 50 to 30 by changing the infrastructure significantly?
No, we can't. We don't have enough people to do the work, to do the work of working out what the designs would be, going and constructing them. If you think about the hundreds of thousands of kilometers of local
Yeah.
streets.
So it's restriction in terms of resources, right? It's people,
Yeah.
money,
Yeah.
etc. Right? You can do some of this stuff as you go along, but realistically, if you want to be saving lives sooner rather than say over the next 150, 200 years of redesigning streets, you need to change the speed limits.
Yeah. So there's also a behavioral aspect to it of you don't need everybody to follow the speed limit. You only need a small proportion of people to follow the new speed limit.
Or a small proportion of vehicles, not people, to do it. So because I think that's a quite interesting one, because I think one of the things that big advocates for autonomous vehicles claim is that autonomous vehicles will be a lot safer than human drivers. We'll get on to one of the things that they claim is that because autonomous vehicles follow the speed limits, it will actually slow everyone down. So you agree with that then as a
Well, so using the most famous case of privately purchasable self-driving vehicles. Tesla has a mode in the full self-driving called Mad Max. So you can tell the car to let you basically you're changing the parameters so that it's um the way it accelerates, decelerates, takes corners, etc. is, I suppose, more human-like. So if you give people,
Human behavior version of self-driving as Mad Max. So basically, they characterize all humans as Mad Max style drivers.
I, yeah, I think it's Mad Max. George Miller, don't sue me.
But yes, okay. So they have an interesting branding here in
Yeah,
terms of the way
yes.
that
So,
they look, they see it. So they're not saying so this version doesn't break speed limits. It just drives more like a human.
what, so you can tell your Tesla to break the speed limit when
Okay,
it's in when it is in autopilot and self-driving mode. Yes.
okay, interesting.
Yes. So you can, like, even with the base level autopilot, you can go on a motorway and you can say, I want to drive it more than the speed limit, and it will do that.
Okay,
So that's, so whereas fully autonomous vehicles, which are outside of your control and you're only using to get to and from a destination, uh, will a transportation network company for one of them say, well, if you pay us an extra $50, we understand that you're in a rush and we'll get you there a little bit faster.
yeah. This does not seem a very complicated regulatory problem, given that the data and speeding would be captured, and it wouldn't be hard for the regulator to go. You have to report every situation where you
Well,
stay.
well, given the problems that they have in pulling over for emergency services vehicles at the moment, um, I think they're sticking with the move fast and break things approach to the universe. And if there's money in it, yeah, you can always bet a big company will be interested in that money. Or,
Yeah,
or on the other hand, they may say, well, we're going to drive you at 15 kilometers an hour unless you pay us to go 30.
so this is an interesting quirk, right? So in that there's a lot of discussion online about whether autonomous vehicles are safer than humans or not. There's a really good article by David Zipper on Bloomberg about why the data just isn't there yet to support that autonomous vehicles are safer. I think the thing for me is whether you think they're safer or not now. I think it'd be very hard to argue that they're not going to get safer over time. And then there's a question of at some point they will be safer than humans. And then once they are, they will continue to get safer, unlike humans who often don't because of their behavioral
Yeah.
idiosyncrasies. And so autonomous vehicles should make our roads safer in time as they roll out and become increasingly safe, I think. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, yes. So on the other side of the, user choice of not following the rules, the insurance incentive for the autonomous vehicle companies is for them to be more cautious than humans. So if you think about if you have adaptive cruise control on your car, even when you put it on the minimum distance setting that the vehicle will allow, it still leaves a much larger gap than
Humans
many
typically.
humans would.
Yeah, yeah. And so so is that going to solve it? So is our solution to, because when I read the UK's example, they're very big on technology being the answer to their safety challenges, right?
Australia.
Right, and that's a combination of AVs and then ADAS, which is the assisted driving
Yes.
systems, right? How, are those things going to make our systems safe, or do we need to do other things as well? So, is it okay for us then to have 50-kilometer-hour speed limits everywhere, but the autonomous vehicles will make us safe as opposed to 30 kilometers an hour
Yeah.
on roads?
So you still hit fundamental physics.
You do.
So there is a safe deceleration speed for a vehicle that where the vehicle occupants don't get injured. And there's also another risk factor of autonomous vehicles of people not wearing seatbelts while they're in them. So you think of the case of e-bike share schemes, e-scooter schemes. They all require you in most parts of the world to wear a helmet, and they have a helmet with the vehicle, and you got to take the helmet out of its holster at least in order to ride the vehicle, and you sign a thing that says, yes, I'm wearing a helmet. And good proportion of people who are riding those bikes and scooters aren't wearing the helmets that have been provided for them.
Yeah.
And it'll be the same with self-driving cars or with autonomous cars. So if you have a ride-hailing vehicle, will it sit there until all the occupants have got their seatbelts on and that the, the seatbelt buckle is detecting that the seatbelt's on the person?
Yeah.
So you could plug the seatbelt in behind you and sit on the seat, and the vehicle wouldn't know unless the seatbelt reel has a a measure of how much tension is on the reel. So there's ways of getting around it. So, but going back to the core issue, there's still a maximum amount of force that your body can take in a deceleration. So if you want to say that autonomous vehicles will never kill a pedestrian, for example, then you still have limits on the speed that you can do because they can't see around things unless they're all talking to each other, which is another theoretical aspect of autonomous vehicles is like everybody keeps on saying, well, they're all going to talk to each other all of the time and they'll be full situational awareness. And we know that's not happening. You get two different self-driving car companies in San Francisco having an argument at an intersection and beeping at each other because no will yield to
Yeah.
the other
And
because the two vehicles aren't talking to each other.
yeah, and this is from the same car company. These problems are happening, right?
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
this is not two different autonomous vehicle car companies. This is the same autonomous car company.
Yeah.
But in
Yeah.
fairness as well, this is kind of version 1.0 of the software,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yes.
So
But yeah, but
people are kind of going, what are we going to have in 20, 30 years time when this software is being updated, on a
yes.
very frequent basis, right? So this is where these things going to go and people can see how these things might happen.
Yeah.
But then you're still relying on another car coming in the opposite direction, right? And on a quiet residential road,
Yeah, it can't. Yes, the lidars, cameras, radars can't see the person behind a tree.
right? So yes, there's going to be limits on this.
But
Which
but having said that, taking out a 1.5 second reaction time, that's from a driver who's paying really good attention to the road.
yeah.
At 50 kilometers an hour, you're looking at about 10 meters worth of distance before braking occurs.
So is there an argument that should say that AVs should be allowed to travel faster than human drivers?
Well, no, because you still don't see the pedestrian stepping out behind the tree.
Indeed, indeed. So the argument they will make our roads safer, but far from completely safe.
So unless the autonomous vehicle has a red flashing light and is traveling at 10 kilometers an hour in lieu of the person walking in front of it with the flag, then they will not make roads completely safe.
Well, we're going to have a lot of unemployed drivers over the next few decades. Putting them in front of an AV and a flag, maybe that's the way to forward. It's a great job.
Well, you just put a cone on the bonnet, does the same thing.
Yes. All right. So we've got a range of options now for making our roads safer.
We
Okay.
haven't really talked about the people aspect of it as well.
Okay. Let's talk about the people aspect. Okay.
Yeah.
Go on. Talk to me about
Yeah.
the people aspect.
So the people it's very much education. So, um,
And this
here's
is
what
gonna,
will happen. So there's a bit which is here's what will happen to you if you have
yeah.
a crash.
This has been happening for decades, right? Education. Okay.
Yes.
And we've seen it work effectively on alcohol and car seats through a combination of education and enforcement.
Although seatbelts are still wearing seatbelts is still a major factor in crash fatalities.
Is that front seat belts or rear seat belts or both?
Driver.
Driver. Okay.
Yeah. So, but this is as the overall number of crashes and fatalities per million people has been coming down. Remaining people who don't wear seatbelts properly, don't wear them at all, is actually quite pronounced in terms of crashes.
Okay. So still a significant factor.
A lot of user behavior, not driving at a safe speed for the environment, for either yourself, other vehicles, pedestrians, fatigue. So driving while tired, particularly in heavy vehicle industry, use of technology while driving, so not distracted driving, and then obviously alcohol and drugs. Drugs is becoming more of an issue in parts of the world where cannabis has been legalized because it has reaction time effects similar to alcohol, but the testing, a lot of the testing can't actually tell you whether it's recent usage or
So all of those are factors then, because how effective is our education? How effective is we've been doing re-education on these things for years, but it's always required significant enforcement to drive the improvements as well. And as you said, speed is one of the big factors here.
Mm.
We're not making much of an improvement in that space, are we? People's speeds have not noticeably changed. The way the speeding rates have not noticeably changed, have they? I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I
Um,
don't feel that's the
the
case.
the rate of serious offence speeding has changed. So I honestly don't know whether it's to do with education or penalties. So
Yeah.
the penalties for high range speeding offences have dramatically changed over time from, fines to losing points on your license to license suspension to vehicle confiscation. And vehicle confiscation is the one that really impacts people's ability to repeat offend.
Yes, because suspending
Because
their
what
license, they'll often
they'll
run the
just be,
gauntlet.
no, they'll just keep driving.
That's what I mean. They'll run the gauntlet of
Yeah,
carrying on driving and not being caught. Because how often do people get pulled over to check their license? Very rarely.
yeah. So they get caught as a repeat offender. So
Yeah.
they have their license suspended and they keep on driving and speeding and then get caught.
And so then my suspension might be a bit longer.
Well, then they get banned eventually. So yeah. And depending on where you are in the country, yeah, you can't confiscate it. So, but imagine that. That's You think about somewhere like or places that don't have good public transport, that becomes an employment killer.
Yeah.
So, in country areas in Australia, you will find that there's a reasonably high proportion of people who don't have access to work or have to rely on lifts or use bicycles because of either they've had their licenses
Yeah,
taken away.
it was interesting, during COVID, this issue came up actually. I was involved and the government was discussing access to construction sites and trying to make construction sites safe. And one of the concerns was people being driven to construction sites. So one person driving and picking up colleagues on the way to the construction site. And because of the rules around COVID, it was no, you can't have two people in the vehicle. The problem that construction companies had was a significant proportion of their workforce
Had their license taken away.
had their licenses taken away, which I have to say, anecdotally, I was not surprised. On the roads, the people I often see, and let's say going beyond the speed limit, clearly,
Yeah,
and overtaking everybody, often would be that sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Socio demographic, shall we say?
yeah.
So I wasn't surprised when it came up as an issue, but it was okay. In terms of getting then people safer, one of the things we've got to work out is what are the right levers to pull, right? So one of the things I see with a lot of government strategies is here's 100 different actions that we're going to take. Okay. And road safety ones are like this. We're going to do X, Y, Z, consult, discuss, collaborate, blah, 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 blah. Okay. But there's lots and lots of actions. How should we be prioritizing?
So I suppose it depends on what you're trying to solve for.
Okay.
So yeah, are
So
you?
go,
So
what are the options here?
so is your focus on the highest number of people reached, or is it on killed and seriously injured, on changing the community? So, changing community attitudes, you go the 3.5% rule. You 3.5 get 3.5% of the community to be, publicly in favor or against something. And that's enough to change societies. You don't have to get 50%, plus one. Yeah. So it depends on what your, I suppose, priority is. The thing that might work in a country or regional area isn't necessarily the thing that's going to work in a CBD area. So CBD area, you might have drinking, which is intoxicated people walking onto the road and not carrying and stepping in front of vehicles. So in that situation, while you're trying to also minimize harm around alcohol consumption, you may want to lower speed limits so that when those drunk people step into the road from behind a tree or a pole or a car or whatever, that the vehicle that hits them doesn't cause as much serious harm.
Yeah. But
Whereas a country road, it might be speeding, it might be safety barriers, it might be seatbelt usage.
yeah. So just for listeners' sake, in an Australian context, the bigger challenge at the moment is in rural and regional areas compared to the cities in terms
Yes.
of numbers of people having serious crashes and deaths in it and serious injuries.
Yeah, and a lot of that's speeding and seatbelts, and you have a vast area that you're trying to cover with limited resources.
Yeah. Big country.
Big country, few people outside of town. So in the town areas, in the country regions, they're actually relatively safe. It's the isolated rural roads where people who feel they know the road think they can get away with doing things. Also, driving long distance, they're suffering fatigue.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of factors in there which are
Yeah, yeah,
difficult.
yeah. So
So really, are we saying the priorities are context dependent, or would you go big on technology is going to solve these problems?
So technology probably won't work that well in country areas as a solution
What
outside of the major roads
autonomous vehicles,
because
even?
yeah, yes, yeah, because of the lack of consistency. So when you're using software derived systems, autonomous vehicles need to be, and cars with advanced with ADAS systems, that they all have some form of programming in them, which is, derived from either machine learning or human programming. So an ADAS will identify that there's a barrier that you're about to run into and hit the emergency brakes, like,
Yeah.
go into emergency braking. So that can very much reduce harm, but it won't necessarily pick the edge of the road as well if
Yeah.
there's no line marking in a rural context, and it may not pick the radius of the curve that you're on.
But why don't AV, well, for us, two things, two factors in rural areas, right? Speed, fatigue. These solve problems of both, don't they?
If they work in the environmental context, so in urban environments,
I appreciate the vast majority of their driving at the moment is in urban environments, and it's focused on that, and that's for economic reasons. But if someone purchases, it's not there yet, but there's a level 4 private autonomous vehicle that somebody purchases in the region.
yeah. So level 4 is the key word. Level 4 is not all roads in all
No, it's not.
conditions in all circumstances.
No.
That's level 5, and
Yeah.
the industry's given up on level 5.
Yes. That's,
Because
I don't know,
it's
and that
like
is kind of,
yeah,
and that is kind of why I said level 4 in a way, was because level
yeah,
3 is, basically human,
yeah.
uh, intervention, as a common practice, whereas level 4 is virtually no human, right? Fully level 4. But there'll be, and I can understand that there'll be, getting to that level 5 is a hard ask. Having driven on lots of Australian regional roads in regional trips and things like that, okay, it's not that the roads are so vastly unusual that you're going to be like, wow, this is, from a human perspective, that they are a unique challenge that has to require a completely different driving approach. You have some slightly different hazards, kangaroos on the road, for example, which doesn't happen very often in cities, although it does happen occasionally. Is it a big ask for them to get to be able to cope with it?
I think, yeah. So if you go on true country roads, like a road that connects a town of 200 people to another town of 200 people, or a town to a bunch of farms, and you'll find that the roads are very context dependent, and you will know the locals because they will be driving at a different pace to everybody else because they know how often they're going to encounter another car. But you will still have like a level 3 car with its hands on, eyes on. So any car that you can buy fine that has lane keeping, turning, intersection control is a level 3 car. That they can do the heavy lifting so that you're not as fatigued by driving, but it's how they respond and your human response to them issuing a warning.
Yeah.
So the car will tell you that something's going on, but then you have to react to it. And the more you are lulled into, oh, the car's doing the work, the slower your reaction time is because you're not alert. So the big risk with level 4 is when it's working well, you have very little risk to you as a passenger.
Yeah. I agree.
When it stops working, your reaction time is increased because you're not paying attention to the road environment.
I think as I said earlier, speeding is endemic. It is extremely common for the vast majority of drivers.
And it's seen as okay.
And that's one of the reasons it's seen as okay, right? Is it's kind of like, if I'm doing it, it must be okay. And I think you can go back and go, when everybody was smoking in the 1950s, how bad can smoking be? Everybody's doing it. There's a kind of comfort that we get as a human species in group think. If everybody is smoking, if everybody is drinking heavily, if everybody is obese, it must be not too bad.
Yeah,
Okay.
and speed also has the overconfidence factor. I'm a good driver. I'm not going to run off the road. I'm not going to hit a pedestrian.
Yes.
My
And
speeding's okay.
that's right. And we know from the research that 90% of drivers think they're better than the average or something in that region. I can't remember what the exact numbers are, but it's there's the number of people that think they're above average is well above what it would.
The crash was something that was the other person's fault. Never
Yeah.
the person. Yeah.
So you've got those factors. You've then also got factors like, you know, there'll be times when people will want to speed because they're late for something or other and think that speeding is a reasonable thing to do in that scenario or whatever, right? And so all of those things then make the enforcement of speeding limits politically difficult because you have vast swathes of the population driving and vast swathes of them effectively breaking it. So my
And it's
personal
revenue raising, isn't it? It's just about earning
okay,
money for the government.
this is certainly one of the things that's put out by people who are like say, oh, it's all about anti-cars or, what's the word I'm talking about? What's the phrase that people use now if you're not car haters or something like that? I can't remember what the phrase is, oh, it's just about raising money. And yes, the fines for road safety do raise significant sums of money, but in most places, and certainly in Australia, that's legislated to go back into road safety improvements, which includes things like improving the road safety infrastructure, education campaigns and those sorts of things. So it's not this huge pot of money that is going to fund everything in the entire world and targeted at drivers. But there's an important point there, which is the aim is not to raise money.
Yes.
The aim is to improve safety. Okay. It would be much better to have an enforcement system that raised no money because everybody was following the rules and therefore
Yeah.
was safer. And so you'd have a lot lower situation. But it does create a political dynamic. So let me tell you the story about what happened in the last few years in New South Wales. So historically in New South Wales, we have had speed cameras, but they have always had to have signage to say there is a speed camera coming up. And so what you see is that people go from breaking the speed limit to slowing down. And this is a very common phenomenon around the world as the sign comes up that says there is a speed camera coming up. Okay. And so
And
everyone
then they
slows down
accelerate again.
and then they accelerate off again. Okay. So because of this and because of the problems in rural Australia and regional Australia, the New South Wales government decided to implement removing the signs that told you where speed cameras were. Okay. Now, was I in favor of this from a road safety perspective? Yes. Did I think it was a terrible idea politically and how it was going to be implemented? Absolutely. Because as soon as I saw that announcement, I thought this is going to be a disaster, which it was. And I'll explain why.
Which is interesting because other states have put in speed cameras
Yeah.
and they've had speed cameras that are randomly placed or placed based on crash history and they have no signage.
Yeah.
So
And
with,
I think this was the logic that was playing out amongst the road safety people. And I'm sure it was the argument that was made to the minister and the minister's office, okay, as to why this was going to be acceptable. Okay. let me tell you my lens on where I was coming from, what happened, and what the mistake was, and how they could have got a better conclusion. All right. As we've said, we have a significant proportion of the population that is speeding, right? When you put these cameras in, it was going to be very obvious, okay, that large numbers of people were going to get caught, okay? And it was very obvious as a result of the large numbers of people getting fined, and probably large numbers of people getting fined multiple times, okay, because there's a lag between knowing that you got caught and, you know, getting the notice that you've been caught. It was inevitable that that was going to create a community backlash, in my view. Okay. And that large numbers of people would say this is completely unfair and is revenue raising and is a disgrace. Okay. And that would result in a retreat by the government, a U turn on the policy. Okay. And that's exactly what happened. Right. Huge numbers of people got caught. There was a massive community backlash. The minister had to, got huge amounts of pressure from his colleagues in the party room to say, I've got loads of people complaining about it and saying this is fundraising. You have to reverse this. And that's exactly what they did. They ended up reversing it. And for me, the thing that I would have said was they rushed trying to get to the outcome rather than taking it gently to get to the outcome that they needed. So if I was doing it, I would have said start in one area. Okay. So, in this case, it would have been, say, one constituency, for example. And one, by the way, that was not aligned with the minister or the minister's party as your pilot program, right? And at the same time as doing it, do an entire education program around the entire community. Leaflet them all, communicate them all, tell them making sure that no one can possibly know it's not coming. Really
Yeah.
blanket the information so everyone knows. Okay. There's a sense of fairness thing that you need to build here, that everybody knows this thing is coming. Okay.
Which is what that was done with the average speed cameras. It's like we're putting these things in. We're going to start off with trucks, then we're going to move to cars, and when we move to cars, we're going to spend a year sending you warning letters. And it's
Exactly.
like,
And that's a
yeah,
really good sign, right? It was the
yeah,
next thing should have been warning letters.
yeah,
Okay. It shouldn't have been straight to fines and losing points on your license. It should have been warning letters. Okay. And it should have been something like a graduated response. So it might have been for 3 months, we're going to send you warning letters. Okay. Then after that, you will have 3 warnings before there will be a fine. Okay. And so that people know that so that people got accustomed to driving at the proper speed rather than getting fined in order to get to them to do the proper speed. And if you'd have had that gradually, I think you could have a worked out in that one place, because I said you would have restricted it in the location, is how well is it working? What's our level of awareness in the community that this thing is coming? Okay. Done a proper tracking of how it was done. Okay. The success rates you were seeing. Were you seeing people reducing their speeds? Because you could easily have monitored whether speeds were being reduced or not. Okay. And whether it was leading to the outcomes that you wanted to. And therefore, you're also going, when are we going to actually find people? Is it actually 1 mile an hour over the speed limit? Forget the accuracy problem on that. But, is it, if they're 20 miles an hour, okay, and that's going to impact everybody, that's not going to work. But if you've got a hardcore that are going, say, 30 miles an hour, maybe that's the group you target to start with as well. And you slowly tighten it up as you go, as you progress. So it's a gentle journey of getting everybody to get their speeds down in a way that the community accepts and comes
yeah.
across much fairer than a sort of big stick in order to deliver it. That would have been the politically smart way for me of delivering on it. That's one lesson, is gradual would have been much more effective. I think if we'd have done that, we'd have had New South Wales right now having speed cameras. And most importantly, I think we would have had much better speeds, more compliant with the speed limits, and importantly, less crashes, less deaths, less serious injuries. And unfortunately now it's toxic for politicians. I don't think it's like, I think if a politician did it in an opposition seat, right, as I've just suggested, I don't think the politics of that are that difficult. It's just you need to think about it. There's nobody I would know. It's that sort of thinking politically about this is not going to come from typically from the public service. And so a minister really needs to be thinking about that in that way. And that's a really hard ask.
Ideal world, you don't want your public service thinking about how to target particular seats for
You know, that's
independent
political.
actors.
That's a political decision, but they're allowed to say, "Let's trial it in an area." The decision on which area to do it in is very much within, there may be a technical reason on areas that they recommend, but the political lens is which, political seat am I going to do this in?
Yeah. And earlier while we were talking, I looked up some stats, and between 2020 and 2022, the level of people who self-reported as always been compliant with the speed limit in Queensland dropped by 10%. So, and then th- this is where safer roads and safer vehicles could actually be having a backsliding effect on behavior.
Yeah, or they're going becoming people are becoming more honest in Queensland. It's an alternative hypothesis.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on that one.
Okay, whatever. So
I
so
don't.
anyway, I think that's an example of a really important way that you need to be, that the political lens needed to be put over the policy, and it wasn't in the way that needed to be done. And the result was, unfortunately, a disaster and a U-turn, and we're back at square one.
Yeah, and I recall Lee Waters from Wales talking about the countrywide drop from 30 to 20 miles
Yeah,
per hour, and the negative or the backlash effect that that had, because it was a blanket rather than a road by road or area by area. So they didn't look at places where they should actually keep it at a higher speed limit. They just went, we're just going to reduce it everywhere and then wind it back from that. And the winding back was in response to the backlash. But they've had a very significant reduction in serious injuries and fatalities. I believe they've had no fatalities since they reduced
yeah,
the
yeah.
speed.
They recently showed the result. The results came out a few months ago. They were extremely good in terms of reductions in killed and seriously injured in Wales. I've had this conversation with kind of Lee Walters over social media and stuff in terms of the politics of it. And I think it'll be interesting to play it, see. I think people have to go back and have a look at it and how it plays out. I think one of the things that's likely to happen, I think there's elections in Wales this year in May. There is a very high chance there will be a change of government. That's way beyond the 20 mile an hour situation. But I think it could be a government that is hostile to lower speeds. And it'll be interesting to see whether, or inherently would be hostile to lower speeds typically. And it'll be interesting to see whether they row it back or whether they just leave it as it is. Because I think that will tell us a lot about the politics of it, whether people are just accepting it now. Because that's the thing with a lot of these changes. You get a lot of opposition at the time, but once you put the change in, people would never go back. And I think it'll be interesting to see how Wales goes with that. The other thing I think is an interesting way of doing it was, I think there's been really, really interesting lessons learned from Bologna. So that's a city in Italy, and they went to 30 kilometers an hour, and I was really impressed with the communication strategy they had around it. So there was a lot of work done on explaining it to people well before it happened. They had community people. I sort of had like community reps. So people always had local people to talk to about the concerns and the issues that they had. There was a huge amount of work and notice and information provided and education of the community before they implemented it, and then lots of support afterwards to try and prevent things like, conspiracy theories and misinformation. Um, so there was lots of people they could go to in their local community who could, literally speak to an individual face to face and say, "I have these concerns over these things. Why are we doing this?" and explaining why.
So it has been halted as of yesterday.
Yes, but that's interesting. Of course, is that's not been through the local situation.
No, it was through court. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and that was through the
Interesting, taxi drivers. Oh, I thought people who are charging money based on time. I thought they would be nominally in favour of the lower speed limit, even though it doesn't actually make any difference to real travel times
yeah.
in urban areas.
Indeed. And that was the thing the research was showing that it didn't. But it shows you the politics of it, right? The challenges of it are hard, and you know, taxi drivers are feeling the strain. I suspect the taxi drivers actually the reason it's a bigger threat is people stop using vehicles. They were walking and cycling more, right? Because it's a much nicer environment.
Well, yeah, and for I think one of the things, behavioral things about lowering speed limits is people say that they're not actually saving that much time or their travel time isn't really increasing. And then they go, actually, I'm not going that fast. I could ride a bike. So not only does the environment feel safer, but when they realize that their time hasn't changed with the reduced speed limit. So even if you go, um, the major cities in Australia, your average speed, even on arterial roads, is about 35 kilometres an hour,
Yeah,
unless you're doing pure motorway driving outside of peak.
but
So,
absolutely.
yeah, so when you reduce the speed limit, your average speed only drops marginally, but you're moving along at a more sedate pace.
Yeah, but the biggest factor I think is people feel safer on those roads, walking or cycling.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that's the biggest factor that puts people off walking or cycling is the safety aspect. So by making it feel safer, you make cycling and walking more desirable for people. And so inevitably, a combination of what you said, as you say, cycling is now an option in terms of speed, but it's also an option in terms of safety, which it wasn't previously. So I think that's why you get the big sort of mode shift stuff. Just carrying on the politics, I think um, there's a whole bunch of other stuff as well, which interestingly enough was in the UK road strategy, which was controversial. And so they've kind of decided to consult on it and we'll have to see what happens. So you've got things like as the population ages, the number of older drivers is increasing. And we know that we need to do more around making sure that people are still physically able to drive, especially around things like eyesight. They're talking about eye tests for over 70s to make sure they can actually see to be able to drive properly. And that will be controversial.
Interestingly, getting back to speed, reaction time significantly declines above 70. Uh,
The age of
so,
70.
so having a lower speed limit actually enables those people to keep driving. So, baby,
Great argument.
any baby boomers listening, you should be favouring lower speed limits because you'll get to keep your license for longer.
Yeah. Not an issue for Generation X yet, but it will be soon.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yes. Yeah, so that's a good example. They're
Yeah,
also consulting on lower alcohol limits.
yeah.
Um, and there's a kind of I know there's a purist view that says, any drop of alcohol impacts your reaction time, and it certainly does, but it's still politically controversial and difficult.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
people are still very casual about having a drink or two and thinking that they're under the limit.
If you drink a pint, you're probably not under the limit.
Exactly right. And that's part of the confusion is that people are unsure about the limits,
Yeah,
right? Okay, it's confusing. It's not like this pint, this spirit, whatever.
yeah,
It isn't a straightforward conversion, right? As to whether it's acceptable or not. There's a good argument saying no alcohol um, should be there. So I think you've got all of those things are controversial and difficult to do. But anyway, I think that's been an interesting discussion on where we go from road safety from now. But I think reducing speeds and getting smarter speed enforcement would be a really good step forward.
yeah. So thank you, Russell.
Thank you, Graham. Great to talk to you as always.
And please like, subscribe, buy us a train or bus ticket if you're feeling generous. And I'm sure you'll have comments about all the places where we're wrong, and we want to hear them. There's no, no
That
such thing as a bad comment.
that is a really good point. I get so much out of people saying, Russell, I disagree with you on this. Here's an example of where you're wrong. And then going and researching that exemption and finding that often it's an exception that proves the rule as opposed to, but sometimes I'm wrong as well. So, and I learn new things. It's always good.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to the day when you tell me that you're wrong. But you can probably say the same about me. All right. Yeah, and yeah, you'll see us next week when we talk about another topic. I think we've done enough on road safety.
I think so. I'm sure we will come back to it sooner rather than later.
Yes, after all the comments.
Thanks, Graham.
Thanks, Russell.